Orders of the day, private members' business, consideration of the motion for second reading of Bill S-203, ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act, in the name of Ms. May.
Saanich Gulf.
Ms. May, Saanich Gulf Islands, seconded by Monsieur Choquette, moves that Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Debate. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor for me to rise this evening to speak at second reading on Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. This is a bill with a very interesting history. It's already been considered in the other place because it originated in the Senate, introduced by Senator Moore from Nova Scotia, who is now retired. It was picked up, the support for it, by Senator Murray Sinclair.
Have this bill in my hands to take it through the House. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like us all to regard this bill as being in our collective hands. It is best that we not see this as a partisan issue or for anyone's particular credit. It's about time that we took the actions that are put forward in this legislation. We've learned a lot about whales and dolphins, Mr. Speaker, over the decades. It happens that one of the pivotal stories that changed how humans thought about whales has a link to my own writing. There's the story of a whale, an orca, that was wrongly named Moby Doll instead of Moby Dick, because when humans first took this whale into captivity, they wrongly assumed they had a female whale. This story goes back to an effort to actually kill the whales to study them. And in those days, and this was back in the 1950s, they thought that killer whales, and killer whales are carnivorous, they will eat seals, but they're extremely friendly towards human beings. They're not a threat to human beings in the open water. And off Saturna Island, which is one of the perfectly gorgeous small islands that I'm honored to represent here, I represent Saanich Gulf Islands, Saanich being the anglicized word for the Wasanich Nation, which is on whose territory, unceded traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, the islands were scattered. And in Wasanich traditional creation myths, the islands themselves had life and had been people and were scattered. One of those scattered islands is Saturna, which still to this day has the most astonishing land-based whale watching that you can experience. In any case, the scientists came out, people came out from the Vancouver Aquarium with the idea of capturing and killing a whale. They harpooned this killer whale and held it for a period of days and realized that this whale was intelligent. The taking of Moby Doll was the beginning of scientists realizing these whales aren't big fish. These whales remind us of ourselves. They're sentient they're sentient beings. In Senchothan language, as I was mentioning, we're all related. In Senchothan language, the word for human beings is the human people, and the word for whales translates as the whale people. We're very connected. And that connection with whales has led science in different directions. Moby Doll did not survive. They didn't know how to feed it. It was already injured. But we learned a lot from that one contact. We learned whales are our relatives. They're sentient beings. They are intelligent. Now, over the years, this has led us to greater research. What are the needs of whales? They're social creatures. We now know the southern resident killer whales in the Salish Sea are acutely endangered. But we've learned a lot about what their needs are in the wild. They need a lot of space. They need to be able to swim in the wild. They have social needs, they have physical needs, biophysical needs. They need to be in the wild. But in the meantime, our fascination with them, and for obvious reasons, they're fascinating. We've had keeping whales in captivity become a form of entertainment. But increasingly, the science makes us understand that what might seem to be a simple entertainment and a simple pleasure is actually animal cruelty. Because these animals can't be held in a swimming pool without significant cruelty, without real pain, without a loss of social contact, a loss of their normal activities. It's just, as the science points out, cetaceans suffer from confinement, isolation, health problems. It reduces their lifespan. They have much higher mortality in their calves. The deprivation to their senses constitutes trauma. And when they're moved from place to place, or when they're kept in captivity or bred in captivity and separated from their calves, they suffer. We saw this in the wild this summer, Mr. Speaker, when one of the southern resident killer whales that still survives in the wild in the Salish Sea gave birth, and the calf was born dead or immediately died thereafter. And that mother whale pushed that calf through the waters for 17 days of grieving. And even scientists who wanted to say, well, we can't anthropomorphize, we can't assume that that whale was actually grieving, when it went on for 17 days, they realized this is a mother grieving the loss of that calf. Well, imagine those kinds of sentient, emotional connections and deciding that you can keep whales and dolphins in a swimming pool, and that will be fine. Now, we have taken steps in this country, and very recently, and thanks to the Minister of Fisheries, he's currently the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, so I won't use his name in this place, but it was the former Minister of Fisheries who shepherded Bill C-68 through the House. It's now before the Senate, and it quite rightly, and for the first time, bans capturing whales in the open water. But what C-68 doesn't do is deal with this additional large risk of keeping whales in captivity, of breeding them in captivity, of selling them, importing, having a trade in whales and dolphins. And that's what this bill will end. This bill will end the keeping of whales and dolphins. This step has already been taken by the United Kingdom, by Italy, by New Zealand, by Chile, by Cyprus, by Hungary, and Mexico have either banned or severely restricted keeping whales in captivity. I also want to acknowledge the leadership in this regard of the Vancouver Aquarium. The Vancouver Aquarium, by the way, has a phenomenal science program. I love touring and talking to their scientists. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting on issues like plastics in our oceans. But they did keep whales in captivity for entertainment, and they have pledged to stop. Voluntarily, they have said they will stop. Now, this bill is supported by numerous leaders and marine scientists, by the Humane Society International and in Canada, by the Jane Goodall Institute, by Animal Justice, by the former head trainer at Marineland, who has appeared at press conferences with us in this place, Phil Demers. We still have whales being kept in captivity in Canada. And we don't want to put the one institution that keeps whales in captivity out of business. There are lots of other ways to maintain a tourist attraction with the great facilities that are present in that facility. There are display and trained seal operations one can imagine. I think of Cirque du Soleil and what they do, because we used to think circuses needed animals. You needed to see the elephant lumbering through. And we now know that one of the most successful, economically profitable, off-the-charts successful circus is Cirque du Soleil. Pas un seul animal sauf...
With not a single animal except humans. But Cirque du Soleil is celebrated, and it's a huge success. And the same thing could happen for Marineland in Ontario. They could have a Cirque du Soleil type success, but it could be like a sea circus.
Advice, but I want to make it really clear. This isn't about shutting down a tourist attraction. This bill is about ending animal cruelty. We can't pretend anymore that we don't know that this is cruelty. It's very clear from scientists from around the world, and I'm really pleased to know that I think that this bill has been so far supported and seconded officially by members of other parties in this place, which is why I hope that this will be a nonpartisan effort that we can collectively and together, well, that is redundant, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, I try to avoid redundancy, we can collectively and collaboratively end keeping whales and dolphins in captivity and phase out the trade in whales and dolphins and ensure that Canada joins other progressive countries from around the world in protecting our whales in the wild. That must be done. We know we have 3 species right now of critically endangered whales, the right whale in the Atlantic, the belugas and the Saguenay, and, as I've mentioned, the southern resident killer whales of the Salish Sea. Much more needs to be done to protect whales in the wild. But we can't, as a country, continue the practice of holding these animals, animals of intelligence, animals with complicated communication systems, their ability to communicate songs over wide distances in the open ocean is impossible when they're kept confined in essentially swimming pools. No matter how much affection may appear between a trainer and a whale, these animals are being kept in ways that harms them, kills them, and denies them their ability to be what they are, magnificent creatures. The Leviathan, one of the great texts of the Bible to describe a non-human species, is the description of Leviathan, one of God's great creations, masters of the oceans. They cannot any longer, Mr. Speaker, be kept in captivity. I know I have a little bit more time to speak, but what I want to do is just, at this moment, je vais exiger tous mes collègues.
I'd like to ask all of my colleagues here, all of my colleagues of all other parties, to put an end to this approach toward whales and dolphins. It's cruel, and we need to put an end to keeping whales and dolphins in captivity.
Again, the second reading process for this bill. Please, I urge my colleagues, let's get it expeditiously to committee. Let's get it expeditiously back for report stage and third reading. And let's ensure that when we go back to our electorate in each one of our ridings across the country, we're able to say, we did one thing this year that I'm really proud of. We ended the practice of keeping whales and dolphins in captivity. We did something that our children want us to do. We did something for the wild beings of this planet. And in honor of Senator Wilfred Moore, I'd like to end my remarks by saying it's time we free Willie. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first congratulate her on a speech that provided a perfect dismount near the end. Free Willie indeed. Senator Moore, she's referring to, I'm assuming. Yeah, a fine colleague and an incredible person. I miss him. Regarding, I remember watching the documentary some time ago, and there are very few people in North America probably did not see it, which was, I think it was aired on CNN. It was called Blackfish, of course, about the situation in the south with the orcas or the killer whales. And it was so illustrative about just how difficult this is, and there's so much involved here. And as she aptly described it as being fish, big fish in a small bowl, essentially. And the behavior of some of these mammals is incredible. And it was very enlightening for me, and I think for obviously millions throughout North America. One of the aspects of that was talking about the markets by which that some of these people, I think about wholesale retail, if I can use that as an analogy. We know the places that are around North America where you bring your kids to watch these mammals perform. but the markets by which that they get these mammals, where are they most egregious? The practices, I'm assuming, have been cruel in many cases. That's been documented. And how does this bill affect that? And I don't want to signal any countries here, but nevertheless, there's quite a market in this, and it seems to be a viciously cruel way of taking these very, very young animals.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I thank my honourable colleague from Newfoundland and Labrador, which also has spectacular whales in your offshore, the humpbacks, the minkies. We are a country with 3 oceans, and so we have wide varieties of whale species here. But he's quite right. The taking of whales in captivity, from the ocean and taking them into captivity is cruel. The trade does involve countries like China. We've heard rumors that the belugas that are currently held at Marineland, and there are over 22 belugas there, there's speculation and concern that they may be getting ready to sell them and trade them. So the and to trade them to China. So the international trade in whales is a profitable one, and whales die in the process. And again, I think the honourable member who raised that the documentary, the movie Blackfish, I think that was actually Senator Moore's inspiration for bringing forward S203. He was so deeply disturbed by the story of Tilikum, the captive orca, that he just wanted to make sure that Canada wasn't part of this trade. And it's simple legislation as far as it goes. It's clear. It does the right things, and it does them for the right reasons.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Saanich Gulf Islands and I both represent regions of the Salish Sea, both very much informed by our constituents who talk about the need to protect whales, to take our responsibility as citizens to, now that we know the impacts on these highly social species, how important it is for them to be able to dive deeply, to be able to communicate with each other, the social needs and the feeding needs of the species. Of course, you know, it's increasingly abhorrent to have them in captivity. My nieces, Rachel and Brianna, when they were very young, the cool thing to do was have a birthday party at the aquarium. Now they say, and all their friends, no way, that would be the worst birthday party you could ever go to. They're much more interested in going to aquariums or kind of Ripley's Believe It or Not. And as a result, the stocks of these SeaWorld and so on have dropped as the appetite is less. So I'm curious, my fellow parliamentarian, her sense of the public support that she's had for the eventual phase-out of keeping whales in captivity.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands in 45 seconds or less, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague for Nanaimo Ladysmith. We do share a lot of causes that relate to protecting the Salish Sea. In the level of public support for protecting whales is frankly just off the charts. It's very hard to find anyone, and I get lots of letters from school groups. I've had thousands of letters of support, and the effort to get this bill through the Senate. I have to say it was blocked for a long time in committee in the Senate, and thousands of Canadians worked with Senator Moore and then Senator Sinclair to get the bill through the Senate. That was a long struggle. That took years. And that's why in this place we must meet the expectations of Canadians from coast to coast to coast and ensure this bill passes expeditiously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill S203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts, also known as the Act for Ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins, or as we have heard, the Free Willy Bill. It was introduced in the other place, as was indicated, Mr. Speaker, by the Honourable Senator Wilfred Moore on December the 8th, 2015, and following his retirement was carried by Senator Sinclair. The bill proposes amendments to the Criminal Code, the Fisheries Act, and the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulations of International and Interprovincial Trade Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to repeat that through my speech because I only have 10 minutes. As I refer to that statute from here forward, it will be WAPRITA. The goal of these amendments is to end the captivity of cetaceans, that is, whales, dolphins, and porpoises in Canada. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the stated objective of Bill S-203 is to gradually reduce and eventually do away with the practice of holding whales, dolphins, and other cetaceans captive in Canadian facilities. Bill S-203 proposes amendments to the Criminal Code that would make it an offence to hold cetaceans in captivity. It proposes an amendment to the Fisheries Act that would prohibit the capture of cetaceans in order to take it into captivity. And finally, S-203 proposes to amend the WAPITRA to prohibit the import of cetaceans into Canada and the export of a cetacean from Canada. Le projet de loi
Bill S-203 is a response to growing concerns about the well-being of cetaceans. There is much more awareness today and also a better understanding about the nature of these animals and the conditions that they need to remain happy and in good health. There is undoubtedly growing support for the protection of whales and other marine mammals in Canada and around the world.
Its introduction, Bill S-203 has undergone significant changes. Our colleagues in the other place, particularly through the consultations and study done by the Standing Committee, have sent us a bill which deserves our full consideration. Bill S-203 also now includes provisions that are an affirmation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, many of which feature whales as a central part of their culture and traditions. In order to enable certain critical conservation and research activities to continue, Bill S-203 includes provisions that would create exceptions where an animal is in need of rescue or rehabilitation. Cetaceans currently in captivity at Marineland and at the Vancouver Aquarium would also fall under exception clauses. That is, these facilities would not be closed down, leaving animals to have never known another home with no place to be cared for. We are surrounded on 3 incredibly wide-ranging coasts by spectacular oceans. These waters are home to 42 distinct populations of whales. Toutes ces espèces animales et
All of these animal species and many others face critical threats. Climate change has had an impact on the temperature of oceans, which in turn has affected food supply, illegal undeclared fishing and unregulated fishing, bycatches, and getting caught up in fishing gear, as well as less food, sound pollution, environmental pollution, and even collisions. All of these factors are threats to cetaceans.
protection of marine mammals in the wild, including cetaceans, has become a whole-of-government priority in Canada. This priority has been underscored by increasing threats facing 3 endangered species of whales: the southern resident killer whales on the west coast, the North Atlantic right whales on the east coast, and the St. Lawrence estuary beluga in Quebec. The government's commitment to recovering and protecting Canada's whale species is reflected in the support provided through the $1.5 billion Oceans Protection Plan announced by the Prime Minister in 2016, the $167.4 million Whales Initiative announced as part of Budget 2018, and the recent $61.5 million announcement of measures in support of the southern resident killer whale. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has been coordinating with other federal departments and with provincial and territorial governments to advance other initiatives, including reducing vessel strikes and entanglement for the North Atlantic right whale, reducing contaminants affecting the St. Lawrence estuary beluga, and introducing amendments to the marine mammal regulations that establish minimum general approach distances for whales, dolphins, and porpoises in Canadian fisheries waters. Bill S-203's focus is the capture of wild cetaceans for the purpose of keeping them in captivity as an attraction, and ongoing holding and or breeding of cetaceans in captivity. As I have said, there are only 2 facilities in Canada that hold cetaceans in captivity: Marineland in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and the Vancouver Aquarium in British Columbia. Marineland is a commercial facility that has approximately 60 cetaceans, including beluga whales, dolphins, and one orca or killer whale. The vast majority of cetaceans held at Marineland are belugas. The Vancouver Aquarium is a not-for-profit facility. It has only one cetacean at its facility, a 30-year-old Pacific white-sided dolphin that was rescued from the wild and deemed non-releasable. Earlier this year, the Vancouver Aquarium announced that it would no longer display cetaceans and would focus instead on its work on conservation and rescuing stranded and injured whales and dolphins. The Vancouver Aquarium works with Fisheries and Oceans Canada to rescue and rehabilitate marine mammals in distress. The Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard only issues licenses for the capture of a live cetacean when the purpose is for scientific research or rehabilitation. In the past 10 years, only one such license has been issued for the rehabilitation of a live stranded pseudo-orca calf. It has been a matter of public policy for more than 2 decades that wild cetaceans not be captured in order to be placed in captivity unless the goal is to rescue, rehabilitate, and release. Provincial and territorial legislative regimes in this area continue to evolve. In 2015, Ontario banned buying, selling, or breeding orca whales. The province also amended the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act to increase protection for other marine mammals held in captivity. Monsieur le Président, étant donné...
Mr. Speaker, since this bill was debated in the Senate, we have debated proposed amendments here, amendments proposed by the government in the last spring and last summer. My colleagues will have noted that some of the proposed amendments to the bill, C-68, would reach the objective of Bill S-203, which is to end the captivity of cetaceans. Bill C-68 does this while preserving the government's ability to conduct scientific research. Bill C-68 also includes provisions which would guarantee the protections for northern Indigenous peoples to export some cetaceans parts, such as those of narwhals.
Exceptions are made for the minister to authorize an exception if a cetacean is injured, in distress, or in need of care. The bill also proposes a regulation-making authority with respect to importing fish, including cetaceans. This regulation-making authority would allow the government to determine the circumstances under which a cetacean could be imported or exported from Canada. For example, these movements may be permitted for purposes of repopulation or conservation. They may be prohibited if the intent is to display cetaceans in aquariums. These regulatory tools could also enable the government to authorize the import and export of cetaceans to sea sanctuaries should those facilities be established in the future. The former Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard has acknowledged that the amendments to the Fisheries Act proposed in Bill C-68 as they pertain to keeping cetaceans in captivity were inspired by Bill S-203, and in particular the bill's sponsor, retired Senator Wilfred Moore. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that this government and Canadians from coast to coast to coast support the ban on the captivity of cetaceans for the sole purpose of display. And that's why I look forward to supporting this bill to committee and participating in the debate that will occur there and hearing from witness testimony. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to speak on Bill S-203. I am opposed to this particular bill. The bill is fundamentally flawed. I was interested to hear the previous two speakers conflate this particular bill with environmental conservation and the conservation of whales. This has nothing to do with conservation or the environment, and here's why. Any population ecologist worth their salt only considers the numbers of individuals that are in the population. This particular bill, even though the previous speakers tried to conflate it with environmental protection, the only thing that counts, Mr. Speaker, are the numbers of cetaceans that are out there, the population size. So this bill will do nothing for the conservation of cetaceans, or indeed the understanding of the natural world. This particular bill, in my view, is an emotional reaction to a problem that simply does not exist. In terms of cetaceans, I know that the government is always pointing out to problem populations, and quite rightly so, the southern killer whale, the Atlantic right whale, the belugas in the St. Lawrence. But I'm pleased to say that in Manitoba, off the Churchill Estuary, we have a population of beluga whales of 55,000 individual animals, and studies have shown that population is stable and or increasing. Obviously, interacting with cetaceans in the wild is desirable, but many Canadians simply do not have the opportunity to do so. I was interested in the parliamentary secretary's comments about the Arctic and narwhals. I'm one of the few people, I think, in this House, apart from the member from Nunavut, who's actually seen narwhals and experienced their beauty in the wild. It's something that very few people will ever have to see, and I've seen that, and they are a remarkable creature. For many Canadians, however, they do not have the opportunities that people like myself or from the science community have had, and viewing cetaceans in captivity is the only opportunity for many to understand cetaceans. And again, if a person from an urban area who does not have a chance to get out in the wild and view cetaceans, if the only place they can learn about cetaceans is in captivity, obviously there are communications tools that the various facilities will use to inform the visitors about cetacean conservation, and the issue of the endangered species, for example, endangered cetaceans. And this is a very important communications tool. Regarding Ontario, I've been advised that there was a lengthy public debate in Ontario, including the creation of an independent and international scientific advisory panel. And they produced a very comprehensive report. There was the creation of a technical advisory group composed of stakeholders from across the country, public hearings, and provincial legislation, I've been advised, has been passed that expressly permits keeping marine mammals in humane care and creates and implements stringent regulations regarding the care and treatment of marine mammals. Now, the member from Saanich Gulf Islands quickly talked about the issues of animal cruelty and so on, and it reminds me of the debate we had on Bill C-246. The slippery slope, Mr. Speaker, is alive and well when it comes to this type of legislation. Who knows where it will lead? Rodeos, medical research, who knows where this will lead once a bill like this is passed. In terms of Marineland, again, the founder of Marineland spoke to the Senate committee on May 16th of 2017, John Holler, who's sadly now deceased. Some of the takeaways from his testimony were that Marineland employs over 100 people year-round and 700 during the operation season. Marineland has employed over 50,000 people in its 56 years of successful operation. Marineland does not seek or rely on any public funding. Marineland annually commits approximately $4 million a year to advertising, reaching more than 15 million people across Canada and the U.S. Marineland attracts close to 1 million visitors yearly to the Niagara region. And obviously, the entire region benefits from this tourism opportunity. And also of tremendous importance, thousands of special needs children and at least 3,500 per year visit Marineland through special programs, including events like Autism Day. So again, what's important is looking at the population of cetaceans. And I go back to the point that this particular bill has nothing to do with environmental conservation. And nobody should be led to believe that it does. However, the humane holding of cetaceans in captivity following veterinary-approved codes of practice is a conservation tool that can be used to educate Canadians about cetaceans. I recall, for example, the great debates we had on Bill C-246, the animal rights bill that a Liberal member of Parliament brought in, a private member's bill. Thankfully, a number of people in the government caucus voted against that bill. But we could see, even though the protestations of the member who introduced the bill were that, oh no, this will not have this will not affect any of the animal use communities. Well, the animal rights movement is very clever in how they push forward legislation or policy change. The process is start with something that seems innocent and then keep going and going and going, and pretty soon, who knows what will be banned. For example, once you ban cetaceans from captivity, what's next? Let's look at the beluga whales, for example. There's 55,000 beluga whales in the Churchill Estuary during the summer months. Taking 3 or 4, and they're actually hunted by Inuit people from Arviat further north. So taking a few and putting them in captivity, in terms of the population, means nothing. Right now, however, polar bears are allowed to be in captivity. Winnipeg has a world-famous exhibit, a multi-million-dollar exhibit of polar bears. Well, there's less than half the number of polar bears that there are belugas. So what's next? And this can go on and on and on. Some people have a real antipathy towards zoos in general or animals in captivity, but this is how the campaign starts. And this is the reason that I will be actively opposing this particular bill. And in terms of cetaceans, and as someone who's been to the Churchill Estuary and seen the beluga whales, I've been fortunate enough to see narwhals, and they're incredible creatures. And I can certainly understand the attachment that people have to these beautiful creatures. And again, we admire them because we are taught the beauty of nature and wildlife in facilities that are responsible and effective. Without these facilities, many Canadians would never see such creatures. I want to talk for a minute. The Parliamentary Secretary talked about conservation of cetaceans. I want to tell him directly, and the government caucus, the devastating effect that the new marine mammal regulations will have on the community of Churchill. As I said, you can go to the estuary in the summertime, and the beluga whales are there in the thousands. And as soon as you launch your boat, they swim up to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But these ridiculous marine mammal regulations that the government's insisting on enforcing has the effect of potentially killing this $10 million industry. I made a statement earlier in the House today about Churchill. It's a $10 million a year industry. 300 people are employed. The Churchill community is on the ropes economically. And the whale watching industry and the polar bear watching industry, ecotourism, is the lifeblood of that particular community. And again, so in terms of the new marine mammal regulations, there's minimum distance requirement, 50 meters. In the Churchill Estuary, which is not a very large area, if you have 30,000 beluga whales, how can you avoid them? Now, interestingly enough, the marine mammal regulations don't apply to large vessels that may be plying up and down the Churchill Estuary. They can plow through belugas willy-nilly, pardon the pun. But in terms of the ecotourism opportunities in the Churchill area, the ecotourism industry, the very gentle environmental, quote-unquote, use that this industry makes of the Churchill Estuary, it is the ultimate in sustainability. Yet this government is promulgating marine mammal regulations that have the potential to put that industry out of business. I heard about the situation in Conception Bay regarding the humpback whales. There the operators offered the opportunity for people to slip in the water and swim with the whales. And that is now completely, it'll be completely banned under the new regulations. I've been told that the operator in Conception Bay lost $60,000 of business. And none of these regulations will have any positive impact on cetacean populations whatsoever. And I guarantee you, Mr. Speaker, there has been no scientific proof that these marine mammal regulations will improve the situations for cetaceans in Canada. All that they will do is, again, as this Liberal government has done over and over and over again, hurt remote rural communities, and I find that unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise to speak in support of Bill C-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts ending captivity of whales and dolphins. This bill was first introduced in the Senate in 2015. It has taken 3 long years to get it here, and I fully support its quick passage into law. The purpose of this bill is to phase out the captivity of cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises in Canada, with an exception for rescues, rehabilitation, licensed scientific research, or if it's in the best interest of the citation. Keeping these incredible creatures confined is cruel. This is a moral issue, but it is informed by science, and I hope all members of the House will support this legislation. The study of cetaceans is important, but New Democrats believe research on cetaceans can be conducted in an ethical manner, in the wild, where they belong. There, scientists can get a realistic view of their natural behaviors without causing a lifetime of pain and suffering. Science has proven that they suffer in captivity. Let's have a look at what the Animal Welfare Institute reports about their natural behavior compared to when they're in captivity. In the wild, cetaceans can travel up to 100 miles a day, feeding and socializing with other members of their pods. Pods can contain hundreds of individuals with complex social bonds and hierarchies. In captivity, they are housed in small enclosures, unable to swim in a straight line for long or dive deeply. Sometimes they're housed alone without opportunities for socialization, or they are forced to live with incompatible animals and even species with whom they would not naturally have contact. In the wild, cetaceans spend approximately 80 to 90% of their time underwater. They have their freedom to make their own choices. In captivity, they spend approximately 80% of their time at the surface, looking for food and attention from their trainers who make the choices for them. In the wild, they are surrounded by other sea life and are an integral part of the marine ecosystem. They have evolved for millions of years in the oceans, and in most cases, they are top predators. In captivity, cetaceans are in artificial environments that are sterile or lack stimulation. Tank water must be treated or filtered, or both, to avoid health problems for animals, although they may still suffer from bacterial and fungal infections that can be deadly. Other species such as fish, invertebrates, and sea vegetation cannot survive these treatments, so display tanks are as empty as hotel swimming pools. In the wild, cetaceans live in a world of natural sound. They rely on their hearing as we do on our sight. Echolocation is their main sensory system, and they use sounds to find mates, migrate, communicate, forage, nurse, care for young, and escape predators. In captivity, cetaceans must listen to filtration systems, pumps, music, fireworks, and people clapping and yelling daily. Their concrete glass enclosures also reflect sound, so a poorly designated enclosure can make artificial noises worse. Echolocation is rarely used, as a tank offers no novelties or challenges to explore. Mr. Speaker, in captivity, it must be horrific for these animals. Cetaceans are intelligent, emotional, and social mammals. Orcas, in particular, are highly social animals that travel in groups or pods that consist of 5 to 30 whales, although some pods may combine to form a group of 100 or more. Canadians witnessed their extraordinary human-like behavior this past summer as we watched the grieving ordeal of the mother orca J35, Taliqua, who carried her dead newborn calf for about 1,600 kilometers over 17 days. She empathetically held on, diving deep to retrieve her calf each time it slid from her head. Jenny Atkinson, director of the Whale Museum on San Juan Island, told CBC, quote, "We do know her family is sharing the responsibility of caring for this calf, that she's not always the one carrying it, that she seems to take turns. While we don't have photos or other whales carrying it, we don't have photos of the other whales carrying it because we've seen her so many times without the calf, we know that somebody else has it," end quote. This type of grieving behavior is not unique to killer whales. Dolphins and other mammals, including gorillas, are known to carry their deceased young in in what is widely believed by scientists to be an expression of grief. Sheila Thornton, the lead killer whale biologist for Fisheries and Oceans Canada, described it as follows, quote, "Strong social bonds between the families of orcas drive much of their behavior. The southern residents share food, a language, a culture of eating only fish, and an ecological knowledge of where to find it in their home range," end quote. Bill S-203 is an important piece of legislation that grandfathers out captivity in 3 ways. First, it bans live captures under the Fisheries Act, except for rescues. To be clear, the bill does not interfere with rescues. In fact, it allows for research if the cetacean is unfit to return to the wild. Second, it bans cetacean imports and exports, except if licensed for scientific research or in the cetacean's best interest. An example of that exemption would be transfer to an open water sanctuary under the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International Interprovincial Trade Act, WAPITA. Third, it bans breeding under the animal cruelty provisions of the Criminal Code, subject to a summary conviction and $200,000 fine unless provincially licensed for scientific research. It's important to note that Government Bill C-68, which is currently in the Senate, prohibits cetaceans captures except for rescues and authorizes the regulation of imports. But C-68 does not restrict imports or exports by law or ban breeding. S-203 also bans cetacean performances for entertainment. Currently, 2 Canadian facilities hold captive cetaceans. The Vancouver Aquarium holds 1 dolphin and has publicly committed to not hold any new cetaceans following the Vancouver Park Board ban. And Marineland in Niagara Falls, Ontario, holds 50 to 60 belugas, 5 dolphins, and 1 orca. Since 2015, it has been illegal to buy, sell, or breed orcas in that province. For these facilities, a change brought on as a result of Bill S-203 would be felt gradually. Marineland, for example, could keep its current whales and dolphins, many of which should live for decades in that time. They could evolve to a more sustainable model, perhaps with a focus on conservation. The Vancouver Aquarium, for instance, could retain its current residents for research, and they may even acquire new whales and dolphins through rescue and rehabilitation. Phil Demers, a former head trainer at Marineland, said this about the bill, quote, "As a former marine mammal trainer, I believe the bill to ban cetacean captivity and breeding in Canada is imperative and long overdue. I have witnessed the psychological and emotional consequences captivity imposes on these magnificent beings and those who care for them. No living being should be forced to endure what I've witnessed, and it is my hope that this bill will finally put an end to these cruel practices," end quote. It's about time. Canada is behind other jurisdictions on this issue. The United Kingdom, Italy, New Zealand, Chile, Cyprus, Hungary, and Mexico all have already banned or severely restricted these practices. And companies have began ending their partnerships with other companies that keep cetaceans in captivity. Air Canada, WestJet, JetBlue, Southwest Airlines, and Taco Bell have all recently ended their association with SeaWorld Entertainment, which operates a total of 12 parks in the United States. In a letter to the Vancouver Aquarium, Dr. Jane Goodall said, quote, "The scientific community is also responding to the captivity of these highly social and intelligent species, as we now know more than ever about the complex environments such species require to thrive and achieve good welfare." Those of us who have had the fortunate opportunity to study wild animals in their natural settings, where their family, community, structure, and communication form a foundation for these animals' existence, know the implications of captivities on such species. Mr. Speaker, just a time check quick. I'm out of time. I will conclude in saying, Mr. Speaker, in 1997, I received the honor of a lifetime when the Squamish Nation bestowed me with the name E.M. Yoyos, meaning orca, blackfish, or killer whale, strong swimmer in the animal world. They gave me this name for the work I'm doing to conserve, protect, and restore the watersheds, our marine environment, and the natural world, which includes these whales. Mr. Speaker, I encourage all members to get on the right side of history and pass this important bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Toronto Danforth, who will have approximately 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to be able to stand today and support this bill to end the captivity of whales and dolphins. What's important to me when I look forward to this bill and seeing it go forward is that we're making steps forward on animal welfare. There is so much more to do, but we're seeing steps going forward. I was pleased to speak in favor of the bill that would end the sexual abuse of animals and animal fighting. I am looking forward to bills that are coming from the other place in respect of testing on animals for cosmetics, as well as shark finning. And today, I'm very pleased to be able to stand in support of this bill, which builds on work that was done by the government bill C-68, which was also aiming to end captivity, or at least the capture of cetaceans to be kept in captivity. This Senate bill goes further, and it's a very important further step. One of my favorite holiday memories is from my vacation to Newfoundland. I went for a wedding, my friend's wedding, and we went out to Bonavista Peninsula, and we were at the Bonavista Social Club, great pizza, by the way, as well. But as we sat there on the porch, I sat there with my family, and we watched whales out in the bay, and it was the most beautiful thing. But what was beautiful about it wasn't just the whales, it was the fact that they were in their natural element. It was part of what added to the beauty. And what really, if you want to learn about animals, and you want to learn about cetaceans, the best way is to see them actually in nature, just enjoying themselves and being together. That was something that was truly one of my favorite holiday memories. And so when I compare that to what I hear about the conditions of cetaceans being kept in captivity, it breaks my heart. And it breaks my heart when I hear members from across the way talking so disparagingly about taking this step forward to support our cetaceans and to make sure that they do not suffer. And the funny thing is, this is actually a fairly new development that we would keep cetaceans in captivity as we do. Because in the 1960s, that's when it started. In fact, as far as I understand, the first orca on display was in 1964. So this isn't something that has happened forever. In fact, it's a fairly recent thing. But 54 years after that time, when that first orca was put on display, it is finally time to put that to an end. It is time for us to say no more. And I would like to take a moment to thank the leadership of the former Senator Wilfrid Moore, who brought forward this bill in the other place, and Senator Murray Sinclair, who then took over the sponsorship of this bill and moved it forward. I also look very much forward to working with a member for Saanich Gulf Islands to make sure that we get this bill through this place so that we can move it forward. So what does this bill do? It bans holding cetaceans in captivity. It also bans the breeding of cetaceans, and that is also part of the problem here. It's not just taking them out from the wild, but it's also about breeding them for the purposes of captivity. It bans the capture of cetaceans from the wild, and it bans the import and export of cetaceans. And when I say cetaceans, just for anyone who isn't used to that term, because it was a fairly new term for me, whales and dolphins and porpoises is, I believe, how it's defined. It's important that it has some teeth. So this bill would have a fine of up to $200,000 for people who violate or contravene this bill. As I mentioned, this bill goes further than C-68, but I'm very happy that our government took that first step on this. But right now, C-68 is in the other place, and it's being considered. But this takes additional steps, and they're important additional steps, and I ask all members in this place to take a serious thought and to see about how we can go further. I want there to be no mistake. We must end keeping whales and dolphins in captivity. It's heartbreaking when we hear about it. And we've heard some of the examples, but for example, confining whales to small spaces. A wild orca may travel 150 kilometers in a day out in the wild as part of it. In captivity, I was reading an article that described them as couch potatoes. They're not healthy. Apparently, the largest orca tank in the world is less than 1/10,000th of 1% of the size of the smallest home range for wild orcas. Think of that. 1/10,000th of 1%. That's unbelievable as far as what it would feel like. And to picture it, I saw one example was that an orca would actually have to swim the circumference of the main pool in SeaWorld more than 1,400 times to be able to get that kind of distance. It's dizzying. I couldn't imagine having to go through that. And in fact, I believe that Senator Sinclair perhaps said it best when he was speaking to senators in the other place about this bill. He said, so think about this, senators. How would you feel if you had to live the rest of your life in a bathtub? And so through you, Mr. Speaker, I put that same question to the members here. How would they feel to spend the rest of their life in a bathtub? Another part that really struck me was when I heard about the effect of sound in these tanks for cetaceans. They use sound, I believe echolution is the right term, to be able to get around. It's a main sensory system. Sound is reverberated within these tanks, and they have more sounds from filtration systems, clapping, yelling, music, you name it. Imagine that, being confined to a small space, that you have that kind of sensory overload as part of your time there. It's horrible. And it actually does have an impact on whales and dolphins. So we see whales having self-harm. They harm themselves in captivity. They don't in the wild. But being held in a tank like that, you can understand, having heard a bit of what I have described, how it would be so frustrating for them. So there are things like hurting teeth. Their teeth are damaged from biting on bars, or we see that they will rub against the sides of the tanks and damage themselves. That's not normal behavior. It's behavior of whales and dolphins that are deeply frustrated and being harmed by their circumstances. Another part that we've heard a little bit about, but I'd like to emphasize, is that whales, for example, orcas, are very social. They're very social. They're part of a family. In fact, I read, I believe, somewhere that male orcas never leave their mom. They stay. They'll go away for a short bit, mate, come back. But they stay as a family, and it's very important for them as part of their social gathering that they stay together. If we take a whale out of that family pod, we're breaking a very important tie for them. So not only are they confined to this bathtub, not only do they have these sounds that are disturbing them, but they've also been pulled away from their social network, and that's a very important part of their important health and their mental health. Add to that the fact that they don't necessarily get along with whales from other families. So then you can have aggression between them, and you actually have seen that type of aggression in certain situations. Now, I know that I'm running out of time, but I do want to add this other part, which is shortened lifespan. From everything that I've described, when we have whales in captivity, they do not live as long as they do in the wild. And what I understand, of 200 orcas that have been held in captivity, none have reached what we would describe as old age, which would be about 60 years for a male, 80 years for a female. None of them have lived that long because of the conditions they're being kept in. Now, I know that I have very little bit more time. I do want to mention sanctuaries for whales, because ultimately we're going to have to find a place for them to go for those that cannot be just released into the wild after being held into captivity. And we need to, when we're doing this, make sure that we don't have sanctuaries that also treat them as entertainment. So we need to be sure that when we go forward, that the sanctuaries for them provide them with a healthy atmosphere. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. You have been very kind to give me this time. I would like to thank the animal advocates who have really stood up and carried this ball. We're going to keep carrying that ball and bring it over the line. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The time provided for consideration of private members' business has now expired.